Hi from Bratislava, and it's Gareth here, and the gathering finished yesterday, so I'm chilling out today. It's been a really intense 5 days, and I just thought I'd bring you up to date with some of the themes that came out of the event. You may have seen the daily vlogs I've been doing. There I tried to put the emphasis on the participants, on the atmosphere, so I just wanted to take some time to focus on some of the substance. And I think there were 3 areas which came out for me thematically. The first was sort of language as sound and the importance of that aspect. It may seem obvious, but so many of us are used to approaching languages through the written word, perhaps. Perhaps they've been ruined by years of schooling, I'm not sure. So there was a great talk by Kevin Fei-sun about Shanghaise, which was his heritage language, and how learning Hindi and tuning into some of the sounds of Hindi helped him to go back to that language and get better at it. Then there was a great talk that was by about improving your listening skills. That was Tran Quang Hung, I think, who I hadn't heard of before, a Vietnamese guy, and he was talking about the three phases of improving listening: perception, first trying to chop up the words in a sentence when you hear it, parsing the syntax, starting to learn what the different chunks mean, if you like, and then the final dimension to understanding is the cultural context, what's called the pragmatics of a language. So that was one theme, sort of listening skills. Then, as usual, there were some great methodological tips. The gathering kicked off with Judith Mayer's talk, which was about accelerating your language learning, and she was very realistic. She said, you know, it's a myth to think you can get really good in a short amount of time. You can't buck the system, but what you can do is focus on the essentials that you really need your language for. And she used the example of when she had to give a speech in Indonesian. She just learned the speech, she had the speech translated, and then she worked around that so she could talk in one area. That's almost what Gabriel Gelman in his talk called a Sprachinseln, the idea that you develop fluency in particular areas, like an archipelago of islands, in a way that you can then connect together. He had a lot of other practical tips, such as, you know, describing your way around something if you don't actually know the word for it. So there were good practical tips there. One of the outstanding speakers for me this time was Regalia Kazakov, who is a Russian linguist and academic, and he gave a couple of talks, but one of them also focused in on accelerated learning. And he's a fan of parallel texts, and also mentioned the influence of music in helping tune your brain in to an effective study session. Listening to Mozart apparently is great for stimulating the old brain cells. He's also a fan of using textbooks sensibly, which I am too. Finally, there was the cultural strand, if you like, for me. So there were some really entertaining and enriching talks. Alexander Medvedovich talked about love and the vocab of love in different languages. I remember from that talk that there's even a word in Brazilian Portuguese, which I think might have been one of the winning languages. It's the winning languages for running your fingers affectionately through somebody's hair. So that was a great talk. Renata Hefferman also talked about singing in Persian, which comes back to sound, I suppose, but it was culturally interesting too. Similarly, Anastasia Lubova talked about Почему русские смеются? So why the Russians are laughing? Why are they laughing? This is again about the pragmatics, that's to say the cultural context of a language. You know, when you're with people who speak your target language and they all start laughing, you've understood all the words, but you don't know why it is. And she was looking at how different phrases from different films, adverts, different contexts in Russian cultural life had come into the language. So that was great. And then also on, you know, language revival and minority languages. So there was a talk about Wiki Tongues, the project to collect recordings of language online on YouTube, where Timothy McCain and Irina spoke very well. And then also Brian Liu, as he always does, talked about an exotic, lesser used language. He was talking about Walpiri, an Australian language, and bringing out some very interesting cultural features of that language, such as skin names, the taboos around mentioning the names of close relatives, or any words which sound like the names of close relatives such as your mother-in-law, your son-in-law, and that explains how alternative words can be then borrowed from neighbouring tribes' languages. So that was an interesting area. Dave Prine as well talked about reviving languages which have gone to sleep, if you like, so which have already died out, in his talk about reviving a language from spoken in on the territory of what's now the USA. So that was another fascinating talk, and both Dave and Irina in her talk, actually she was talking about Sami, which is still very much alive of course, but they talked about the emotional loss for last speakers of a language, but also for the subsequent generations, even if they don't realise it. So there was an awful lot, both in terms of practical advice about language learning, but the wider culture, which really inspired me this year. I'm really tired after the event, but incredibly enriched and inspired to go off, get speaking and get learning more in my own language practice. So I hope you feel the same way. If you haven't checked out the 5 daily vlogs yet, have a look at them, and don't forget to subscribe for the vibe, think about a thumbs up, tickle that bell, and share or be square. See you next time.